Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my updated top 32 quarterback rankings for the 2024 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, I'm going to be individually introducing these quarterbacks and sharing with you guys my thought process and opinions while also presenting statistics in order to justify their overall rankings. Now, I wanted to talk about 32 quarterbacks because for those of you who do play in a Superflex or 2QB league, you want to know which third quarterback to have on roster. The scoring format for these rankings are a 4-point per passing touchdown format, and if you're looking for a specific quarterback, there are timestamps in the description of the video, like in all of my videos. So with 32 quarterbacks to talk about, let's go ahead and begin with the number one, Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills. Josh Allen statistically is the greatest fantasy football quarterback of all time, and he's only going to continue to improve. He's been the number one overall quarterback in 3 of the last 4 seasons in a 4-point per passing touchdown format, and what he was able to accomplish at the back end of the 2023 season with Joe Brady as the interim offensive coordinator was incredibly impressive. He was averaging 25.73 fantasy points per game from weeks 11 through 18 and only continued to improve in the NFL playoffs in both those games and fantasy purposes, put up 30 plus points in both of those games. Now, I understand going into 2024, he doesn't have the services of guys like Stefon Diggs or Gabriel Davis anymore. And the only pass catcher that's a wide receiver that caught a ball from Josh Allen last season that is still on roster is Khalil Shakir. I absolutely understand the hesitation, but even late last season, the usage out of Gabe Davis and Stefon Diggs was at an all-time low. And going into 2024 with a quarterback that is so highly capable of scoring fantasy points from his rushing statistics alone. I mean, last season had 15 rushing touchdowns. That is the ultimate upside for Josh Allen and what continues to make him the number one overall quarterback in fantasy football. The blend of being one of the best arms in the game, additionally getting himself all the fantasy points you could ask for in terms of rushing yards and touchdowns. Our number 2, speaking of scoring rushing touchdowns, another quarterback that in 2023 scored 15 rushing touchdowns was Jalen Hurts. He's been a top 3 quarterback in each of the last 2 seasons in fantasy football. And even if you go back to 2021, prior to his injury, was the number 2 overall quarterback in fantasy football. So he's always been in this conversation of being a top 2 or 3 QB. And now that you go into 2024, you get a new offensive coordinator with Kellen Moore. Kellen Moore, back in the day with the Dallas Cowboys, 2021, 2022. When we look at those seasons with Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator, they were number 7 in passing attempts, number 4 in completions, number 5 in passing yards, number 3 in passing touchdowns. They were averaging over 30 plus points per game as a team, while they were number 3 in terms of total offensive touchdowns with 55 within the 2021 season. There is a lot of potential with this offense taking a step forward in comparison to where they were last year. Yes, this is the 3rd offensive coordinator in 3 years, but this certainly can be the biggest change that they need. They're bringing in guys like Jahan Dotson in order to continue to bring firepower into this offense. Obviously, Saquon Barkley was a great addition. I think Jalen Hurts is only going to continue to improve in 2024. The final quarterback I wanted to mention within the S tier is, of course, Patrick Mahomes. I understand that in 2023, in comparison to 2022, he had 14 less passing touchdowns and 882 less passing yards. Now, we all know the primary reason that took place. The receiving talent that surrounded Patrick Mahomes were not up to par. And they've gone ahead and they've addressed that this offseason, bringing in guys like Xavier Worthy and Marquise Hollywood-Brown, in comparison to throwing to guys like Sky Moore or Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Huge improvements at the wide receiver position. So why not go ahead and flip 180? If we were going to bet on any quarterback to make a huge improvement, going into 2024, Patrick Mahomes would be at the top of that list. Again, you're going to re-inject this offense with wide receiver talent that he hasn't had since the likes of Tyreek Hill all those years ago. So I'm anticipating, of course, Patrick Mahomes to be a dominant force within the passing game. He is still able to get himself over 300 rushing yards, to about, on average, 2 rushing touchdowns per season. He is a mobile quarterback, and his value is only going to continue to increase. What's honestly funny is that he was averaging 17 plus fantasy points per game last season. For other quarterbacks, that's the best season that they could possibly put up in fantasy football. But for Patrick Mahomes, that's the worst season that we could possibly imagine. I anticipate him to get back on track in 2024. Now, before we continue on to the A tier, I want to remind you guys, for those of you guys who are trying to get your hands on my 2024 fantasy football draft guide and rankings, be sure to travel down to the description. You can either check out Patreon or Underdog Fantasy. At this current moment in time, if you sign up using code Andrew and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, not only will you be able to claim the first-time deposit offer, you'll get my 2024 fantasy football draft guide, the associated rankings with the draft guide. I'll also send you an email that includes updated rankings so that regardless of when you're drafting over the course of the month of August, you're up to date and you have an advantage upon your league mates. But I don't want that advantage to end. I want it to continue for the remainder of the 2024 season, as I'll be sending you updated rankings every single Sunday morning throughout the entire season, half PPR, full PPR, all-encompassing rankings so that you can set your lineups and win a 2024 fantasy football championship. So take advantage of the opportunity. Check out the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility. And for those of you who have already signed up or potentially aren't available based on your current location, you can check out Patreon. I have all this content and much more available there. Thank you very much. All right, let's talk about our A tier with Lamar Jackson, who going into this upcoming season, again, it should be a top 5 fantasy quarterback, primarily because he has only demonstrated that over the course of the last 3 seasons. In 2021, prior to his injury, was the number 5 quarterback in terms of fantasy points per game. In 2022, was the number 6 quarterback in terms of fantasy points per game. In 2023, the number 3 overall quarterback in terms of fantasy points per game, averaging 20.7 over the course of the season. He's coming off of an MVP campaign and now has another offseason of being able to understand this offense and truly make the best of it with Todd Monken. Again, last season, in an MVP year, that was the first season with this OC. So now that he has even more experience, now that they bring in even more talent, Derrick Henry's only going to help this offense continue to find success. Zay Flowers gets more experience. Rashad Bateman could end up stepping up within this offense. Isaiah Likely is finding himself within a new role. This offense for the Baltimore Ravens is improving. Yes, they haven't brought in any additional talent outside of Derrick Henry, but they certainly should be on pace to continuing their success in 2024. The number that I continue to look at with Lamar Jackson is that he needs 851 rushing yards to break the all-time total record for most rushing yards by a quarterback in a career. He could very easily surpass Michael Vick this season, and that's what I'm expecting him to accomplish. Number 5, speaking of mobile quarterbacks, we have Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson, over the course of the first 2 games of his NFL career, in which he played fully, in 2023, he averaged 25.26 fantasy points per game. Now, if we go ahead and take into account, the 9 quarters of play he actually participated in last season, he's actually averaging 30.34 fantasy points per game. The volume of success that Anthony Richardson can find primarily revolves around the potential of what we have seen from guys like Cam Newton and Josh Allen, because that is exactly what he is. He's the same size, he's the same skill level, and honestly, he's just a more athletic version than both of them. Sure, he may not be as polished of a passer, but going forward, he's only going to learn and continue to get better. And of course, with having Shane Steichen as your primary play caller / head coach, Shane Steichen, known for his days with the Philadelphia Eagles from 2021 to 2022. Throughout those 2 seasons, Jalen Hurts, 784 rushing yards, 10 touchdowns, 760 rushing yards, 13 touchdowns. We're anticipating very similar numbers this season with Anthony Richardson as the starting quarterback of the Colts. Number 6, to close out the A tier, we have CJ Stroud, another second-year quarterback that I wanted to mention. Coming off of a year in which he played incredibly well, 18.33 fantasy points per game in the healthy games he played. And obviously he missed a couple games over the course of the back end of the year, finishes the number 9 overall quarterback in fantasy football, but is only going to continue to improve. When we look at the last decade of the NFL, there have been 28 quarterbacks that have started their rookie season and played the vast majority of that rookie year, and then followed up by remaining as a starter in their sophomore campaign. Of those 28 quarterbacks, we saw them increase their overall statistics 9% in terms of passing yardage, 18% in terms of passing touchdowns, and 16.4% on average in terms of total fantasy points scored. Now you inject this offense with Stephon Diggs, a returning healthy Tank Dell, Joe Mixon, and a healthy offensive line. Over the course of last season, 10 different offensive linemen started for the Houston Texans offensive line. To begin the season last year, they had 3 or 4 of their starting offensive linemen out for the first month. If you protect CJ Stroud, they have so much more firepower surrounding him. He should absolutely be able to step up and enter the top potential 5 conversation at the quarterback position. I have him number 6 to be safe, primarily because he doesn't have as much rushing upside as all the other quarterbacks I mentioned. The B tier begins with Joe Burrow as our number 7. Joe Burrow is finally getting himself a full healthy training camp. Over the course of the last couple of training camps, he's either been recovering from the ACL, had to deal with the appendectomy, or last season was dealing with that calf injury that bled into the regular season that obviously hurt him. We all remember week 1 of last year against the Cleveland Browns was an absolute disaster. So going into this upcoming season, we're anticipating Joe Burrow to get back on track because when he is healthy, he has been incredible. In 2022 was the number 4 overall quarterback in terms of fantasy points per game. And last year, in the healthy games he participated in, was the number 6 quarterback in terms of fantasy points per game on average. In fact, prior to his injury last season, closed off the season with 5 consecutive games of 2 or more touchdowns scored. There is a high level of consistency that we're going to continue to see from Joe Burrow. All he has to do is stay healthy. I mean, shoot, even Jake Browning came into this offense in the absence of Joe Burrow last year. From weeks 12 through 18, Jake Browning was averaging 18.97 fantasy points per game and was the number 4 overall fantasy quarterback in terms of points per game on average throughout that span of time. Being the number 1 quarterback of the Cincinnati Bengals has a lot of value. All we need to see is Ja'Marr Chase sign a contract and get ready to play, because Joe Burrow certainly will need him. Number 8, we have Kyler Murray, who over the course of his entire career has proven can very easily be a top 3 quarterback. If we just go back to 2020, he proved to us prior to the injury that he had, in which, he tweaked his ankle that season. Prior to that, he was averaging 25 fantasy points per game. So we know his ultimate upside is certainly up there. But what we have witnessed over the course of the last 2 seasons, even though it hasn't been, 20 plus points per game on average, he certainly has still been a top 8 quarterback. Specifically, 2022 weeks 1 through 12 prior to the ACL injury was the number 7 overall quarterback while averaging 19.99 fantasy points per game. Last season, after the return from his injury from weeks 10 through 18, the number 10 overall quarterback while averaging 18.3 fantasy points per game, all while his overall rushing statistics were, a little bit diminished because of the fear of returning from that ACL injury. Typically what we see from quarterbacks returning from injury, and we'll talk about this with Daniel Jones in just a moment, but typically what we see is in their return season, their rushing statistics are significantly less in comparison to the following year after. Now that he has a full year removed from that ACL, we're anticipating to see far more mobility from Kyler Murray. And of course, with new weapons like Marvin Harrison Jr. and now, Trey McBride stepping into the fold and being a top tier option, Kyler Murray should be able to find himself a lot of success in 2024. Number 9, we have Dak Prescott. Even though the Dallas Cowboys really haven't done much to make any offensive additions, they're still going to continue with Lamb, Ferguson, and Cooks being their primary offense. And I still don't see this being a bad thing for Dak Prescott, because never in his career, outside of seasons in which he's had season-ending injuries or significant time missed, he's always been a QB1 for fantasy football. He's always been in the top 12 conversation. We talk about his fantasy point per game averages over the course of the last 4 seasons. 2020 was number 1 amongst all quarterbacks. 2021 was number 8. 2022 was number 11, and most recently this last season was number 4 in terms of fantasy points per game on average. And I understand that this offense not making any additions, losing some offensive line talent may be detrimental, but ultimately I think this is only going to lead to more negative game scripts. Because their running game isn't going to be as crisp as it has been in seasons past, with a committee situation out of Dowdle, Royce Freeman and Ezekiel Elliott, and older Ezekiel Elliott, the running game is not going to be as trustworthy. You're going to have to throw the ball far more. And without Dan Quinn as the defensive coordinator of the Dallas Cowboys, I do think that there's going to be a lot of opportunities for the Dallas Cowboys, and specifically Dak Prescott, to be fighting back into games instead of last year in which they had commanding leads and the defense did not allow Dak Prescott to get back onto the field and score on a consistent basis. I'm anticipating more negative game scripts and potentially a similar level of fantasy points like we saw in 2023. On number 10, to continue the C tier, we have Jordan Love. In his first season as a starting quarterback in the National Football League, being able to finish as QB5 overall and averaging 18.77 fantasy points per game is incredibly impressive. In the 19 games he played throughout the entire season, including the NFL playoffs, 15 of those 19 games consisted of 2 or more touchdowns. When we're talking about consistency at the quarterback position, Jordan Love has already presented that. And even with all the youth that surrounded him last year and the inexperience he himself had, it did not matter. Despite the fact that he had so many rookies and second-year players surrounding him, this team is only going to improve. They have a solid offensive line. They bring in the talent of Josh Jacobs to be the leader of this offense outside of Jordan Love. And he has the second easiest strength of schedule amongst all quarterbacks in 2024. The expectation is that he's only going to continue to improve, get more comfortable within this offense, and of course, LaFleur is going to set him up for success. We have Brock Purdy as our number 11 to close out this tier. The thing about Brock Purdy is that he's only improving as well. Another one of these young players that doesn't have much experience under his belt, but is continuing to improve every year. You go to the 6 regular season games that he played in 2022, was averaging 17.55 fantasy points per game. Last season in 16 games, averaging 18.48 fantasy points per game. Nearly a 1-point jump on a per game average. If he's only going to continue to improve at that capacity, I mean, he finished as the number 6 overall quarterback last season in fantasy football. If he's only going to continue to improve, I understand he doesn't have mobility and the rushing upside that a lot of these other quarterbacks potentially have. And obviously, this offense threw the ball the least amount of times amongst all teams in the National Football League in 2023. primarily because the game scripts that they are in, they're winning majority of the time and they're running the clock out majority of the time. So with that all taken into account, I understand that this limits Brock Purdy, but still, amongst all teams last season, they ranked number 4 in terms of total passing yards and number 2 in terms of total passing touchdowns. With the talent on this team being able to make plays after the catch and Kyle Shanahan's scheme continuing to develop into being the best in the National Football League, Brock Purdy is in perfect hands to have himself another top 12 season. Speaking of top 12, let's finish out the top 12 conversation with Jayden Daniels, the rookie quarterback out of LSU, a most recent Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. And that is important primarily because when we look at the last 10 Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks who have played a full regular season in their rookie year, obviously didn't miss any sort of time that would significantly impact their overall upside due to injury, etc. Of the eligible quarterbacks, only one of them averaged less than 17 fantasy points per game in their rookie season, that being Bryce Young, last season's number 1 overall selection. So under the assumption that Jayden Daniels is able to continue the Heisman streak, 17 games, averaging 17 fantasy points per game is 289 fantasy points, which would have made him the number 7 overall quarterback in fantasy in 2023. That's the level that we anticipate to see Jayden Daniels function at this season. And considering his rushing ability, in 2023 with LSU, 1,134 rushing yards, 10 rushing touchdowns, you bring in Cliff Kingsbury, who was able to elevate a former number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft with Kyler Murray back in his days with Arizona. Kyler Murray showed up in his rookie year, finished as a top 12 quarterback in fantasy, and was number 11 in terms of fantasy points per game, producing 3,700 passing yards, 540 rushing yards, 24 total touchdowns, and 18.17 fantasy points per game. I do anticipate very similar numbers for Jayden Daniels in 2024. Continuing on, speaking of, former number 1 overall selections, we have Trevor Lawrence here, who obviously the last 2 seasons with Doug Peterson have been significantly better than what he produced in his rookie year. He's been a top 12 quarterback in each of these 2 seasons, averaging 17.39 and 17.08 fantasy points per game. Over the course of the last 2 years with Doug Peterson as the primary play caller and head coach of this team, the Jacksonville Jaguars have been a top 10 offense in terms of total passing attempts. And that hopefully is only going to continue because, again, that is where the value is found for Trevor Lawrence. And even though he does have, a downgrade of the wide receiver position going into this year, losing the talent of guys like Zay Jones and, of course, Calvin Ridley, who he built a great rapport with over the course of last season, hopefully Gabriel Davis and Brian Thomas Jr. can immediately impact this offense and be players that can transition Trevor Lawrence hopefully back into a top 12 conversation. What really keeps Trevor Lawrence in that conversation, though, is his rushing ability. Over the course of the last 2 seasons, he has put up a minimum of 325 rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns. When you're able to get 32.5 points based on rushing yards, an additional 24 points off of rushing touchdowns, an additional 50 points from rushing statistics, again, we've talked about the equivalents over the course of the last couple seasons. That's 12 additional passing touchdowns in a 4-point per passing touchdown league that he is getting just off his rushing statistics alone. He's a quarterback that, based on the fact that he has stayed healthy for majority of his career, finds value considering all the injuries we have seen over the course of the last 2 seasons. Again, record-breaking numbers at the quarterback position, but he's played 47 of the last 48 games of his career, and he's only going to continue to get better over time. Number 24, speaking of number 1 overall selections, we continue on that trend with Caleb Williams. Like I mentioned just moments ago with Jayden Daniels, this statistic absolutely applies for someone like Caleb Williams. Of the last 10 Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks who have played a full rookie season, only one of them averaged less than 17 fantasy points per game, that being Bryce Young. So under the assumption that Caleb Williams continues the trend of the Heisman streak, he should be averaging 17 fantasy points per game plus over 17 games, which a base minimum is 289 fantasy points and the number 7 overall quarterback in fantasy from 2023. With Shane Waldron being the offensive coordinator of this team, resurrecting Geno Smith's career the last couple seasons, now joining an offense that, again, has so many weapons at their disposal. DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, Cole Kmet, and DeAndre Swift. A solid offensive line that, sure, at times in terms of pass pro aren't the greatest, but luckily, Caleb Williams has practiced a lot from getting away from defenders, especially in college, considering USC's offensive line wasn't the greatest. So going into this upcoming season, the expectation is that, of course, Caleb Williams, with the 4th easiest strength of schedule at the quarterback position, should find himself a boatload of success, primarily because when you look at all other first overall selections at the quarterback position, over the course of the last decade, Caleb Williams is quite literally joining the best situation we have ever seen a first overall pick join into. Speaking of number 1 overall selections or former number 1 overall selections, let's close out the D tier with Jared Goff. Jared Goff over the course of the last 2 seasons has been incredible. He has started every single game in 2022 and 2023. Throughout those 2 seasons, he's been number 5 amongst all quarterbacks in terms of total touchdowns scored, 61. He's number 2 amongst all quarterbacks in total passing yards, 9,013. And he's been able to average, specifically last season, 17.00 fantasy points per game. And again, that was an uptick of a season, considering all the weapons that surrounded him continuing to elevate. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Laporta finding himself incredible success, Montgomery, a new addition, Jahmyr Gibbs, a new addition, and all of them playing incredibly well. They've improved this offensive line this offseason, and the expectation is as they retain Ben Johnson as their offensive coordinator, Jared Goff and this offense that is only going to continue to build experience is going to continue to improve. The primary reason why Jared Goff ranked so highly in prior seasons was because, again, the record-breaking injuries. In 2022, 68 different starting quarterbacks started within the National Football League. That's the most ever. In 2023, we had the second most ever with 66 different quarterbacks. In fact, last season broke the record for most rookie quarterbacks that started in singular games, 10 different quarterbacks. With all the injuries that took place over the last couple of years, Jared Goff has certainly been a consistent option. And in a 2 QB league, I'd love to have as my second quarterback on roster. Moving on to our number 16 to begin the E tier, we have Kirk Cousins, who has been highly consistent throughout his entire career, and many may be worried about the scenery change and, of course, the injury that he is coming off of in 2023, of course, a torn Achilles, but we're anticipating to see Kirk Cousins just as good as he was last year. And even if he does take a couple steps back based on the change of scenery, the change of coaching staff, the change of offensive weapons that surround him, yes, he's turning in guys like Justin Jefferson, Hawkinson, Addison, who are major weapons, and he's going to now have London, Pitts, Mooney, and Bijan. Again, not the worst overall downgrade. Honestly, could end up being equal by the end of the season if, in fact, a guy like Kirk Cousins is able to elevate their potential. Considering the last 2 seasons, Kirk Cousins has been number 12 and number 8 in terms of fantasy points per game on average at the quarterback position. Number 16 overall rank may be a little bit too low, but again, we're still playing it safe with the overall injury and the change of scenery. The good thing for Kirk Cousins, though, is the fact that he has Zach Robinson as his new OC. He's a former Rams coach from 2019 to 2023. The reason why that matters so much is because Kevin O'Connell, his former play caller with the Minnesota Vikings, was a former Rams offensive coordinator from 2020 to 2021. So the overall scheme, the crossover is going to be seamless for Kirk Cousins, and he should find himself a lot of success this upcoming season. Number 17, we have Tua Tagovailoa, who just cashed in a huge bag just a couple weeks ago, but he's going to have to prove to everyone that he deserves it. Based on my consistency calculator from his 2023 season, he was ranked 20th amongst all quarterbacks in terms of consistency. He was only averaging 15.9 fantasy points per game. And I understand that the Miami Dolphins scoring 27 rushing touchdowns tied for the most in the National Football League with the Lions and 49ers certainly impacts the overall upside of Tua Tagovailoa. And if, in fact, they're going to balance out the touchdowns and hopefully maybe some of those rushing touchdowns go in the direction of Tua Tagovailoa, or at very least, some of those drives end up in passing touchdowns for him. Now that you have a full healthy season potentially from Jalen Waddle, you bring in Odell Beckham Jr., you bring in Geno Smith. There are more weapons at his disposal. Hopefully, Tua's numbers can increase in terms of passing touchdowns, which can get him back to a far more consistent rate in comparison to where he was in 2024. Number 18, we have Aaron Rodgers, the oldest quarterback in the National Football League, who now has a revamped offense. I mean, besides the fact that they completely revamped their offensive line, they brought in Tyron Smith, they brought in Simpson, they brought in Morgan Moses. They additionally drafted an offensive tackle with first-round draft capital from the 2024 NFL Draft. Then you bring in more weapons for him. Malachi Corley, you bring in Mike Williams, and honestly, you still have an elite defense on the other side. If Aaron Rodgers cannot find success with this offense, and with this team in specific, it will be incredibly surprising. And considering how much we know Aaron Rodgers wants to prove to the entire league that he's absolutely capable of finding himself still a dominant force at the quarterback position. When Aaron Rodgers is pissed and tries to prove someone wrong, he typically has himself his best seasons. Number 19, we have Matthew Stafford. A fully healthy Matthew Stafford is something that we haven't seen since 2021, in which he's had a full healthy year. And in that season, of course, broke records. He set a career high in terms of passing touchdowns, incredible numbers. But over the course of the last 2 years, we haven't really had a full healthy Matthew Stafford. It's been the elbow, it's been, his thumb. But still, at the back end of the 2023 year, he found himself a lot of success. From weeks 12 through 17, a 68% passing completion percentage, averaging 284 passing yards per game, 2.5 passing touchdowns per game, 20.3 fantasy points per game, and was the number 7 overall quarterback in terms of fantasy points per game on average throughout that span of time. But even if we rewind to weeks 1 through 7 of the 2023 season without Cooper Kupp for majority of that time, still Matthew Stafford was number 18 amongst all quarterbacks in terms of fantasy points per game on average. The number 19 overall rank is his base minimum floor. And if he's able to stay healthy for the full season, he very easily could finish as a top 12 quarterback for fantasy purposes. In a 2 QB league is someone that I'm always trying to find within my drafts. Number 20 to close out the E tier is Justin Herbert. Over the course of the last 3 seasons, he has always finished as a top 12 quarterback in fantasy. This most recent season, prior to his injury, was the number 6 overall quarterback in fantasy. Now you have a new offensive coordinator, a new regime, and quite frankly, a lot of the pieces that have generally surrounded him, in which he has found success with, are no longer there. There's no Keenan Allen, there's no Mike Williams, there's no Austin Eckler. They're all gone. So what can Justin Herbert potentially produce this upcoming season with Greg Roman and, of course, Harbaugh, primarily bringing in a run-heavy offense? They've gone ahead and they've bolstered this offensive line, which again is probably the best offensive line that Justin Herbert has had in his entire career, bringing in Joe Alt as the right tackle. So if in fact Justin Herbert is going to be protected and he's going to be given time, he is still a talented enough quarterback to improve the talent that surrounds him. And even though he doesn't have Keenan Allen, when we look at the last 9 games that Justin Herbert has started without Keenan Allen in the lineup, he's averaging 16.05 fantasy points per game. There is a lot of potential for Justin Herbert to also even improve his rushing mobility statistics. There have been seasons in the past where he has 300 plus rushing yards. If Greg Roman is going to add that facet to his game, I understand he's dealing with a plantar fasciitis injury, which again, running the ball may not be the smartest idea, but he's been able to get himself over 50 rushing attempts in each of the last 4 seasons. So why not once again this upcoming year to elevate his overall fantasy potential with rushing statistics? Number 21, to begin the F tier, is Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield is one of the last quarterbacks that I feel extremely comfortable having as my second QB in a superflex or 2 QB format. Last season ranked as the number 10 overall quarterback in fantasy football, primarily again because of so many quarterbacks missing time. Let's not forget, again, Aaron Rodgers missed time last season. So did Kirk Cousins. We didn't have Caleb Williams or Jayden Daniels last year. We didn't have Kyler Murray until halfway through the year. Joe Burrow had a season-ending injury. Anthony Richardson had a season-ending injury. Again, amongst the entire field that I just mentioned that are on screen right now, we had a lot of injuries. So of course, Baker Mayfield played consistently, and he was able to get himself into the top 12 conversation. Now, the question going into this upcoming season revolves around, does the offensive coordinator change really impact Baker Mayfield? Because Dave Canales really resurrected Baker Mayfield's career. And now that you bring in Liam Cohen as the new offensive coordinator, we have to remember that Liam Cohen, a former offensive coordinator of the Los Angeles Rams in 2022, again, you got to remember, Baker Mayfield joined the Rams offense late 2022 and played for Liam Cohen. They already have a rapport. They're only going to continue to build upon it. And with all the weapons surrounding him still being in place, Mike Evans, Cade Otton, Godwin, and White, Baker Mayfield should be on track for another successful season. But without rushing mobility, the question is, can he outproduce quarterbacks of the level of Tua, Aaron Rodgers, and Matthew Stafford for another consecutive year? Number 22, we have Deshaun Watson. Here's the thing about Deshaun Watson. Last season, in healthy games, was solid. He was averaging 17.72 fantasy points per game in the 5 healthy full games he played. In fact, the rushing statistics that he had associated with his production were also great. On a per game average, 5.2 rushing attempts per game, 28.4 rushing yards per game, and 0.2 rushing touchdowns per game. Over the course of a full season, he'll find himself a lot of fantasy success just off of his rushing statistics isolated. And if he's able to stay healthy and play significantly better than he has over the course of the last 2 years in terms of the passing game, primarily because they've brought in guys like Jerry Jeudy to help him improve the passing game, the expectation is that Deshaun Watson could be far better than number 22, but to stay safe, we have him in this ranking. Number 23, we have Geno Smith. Geno Smith, obviously, losing his former offensive coordinator, Shane Waldron, is going to be a big difference maker. Bringing in someone like Brian Grubb, we are uncertain as to what this offense is going to look like. But in 2022, most recently, in a full healthy season, Geno Smith finishes the number 5 overall quarterback in fantasy. In that year, averaging 17.87 fantasy points per game, found himself a lot of success in terms of rushing statistics. Now, of course, in 2023, had a huge fall from grace, primarily because of the injuries he sustained, a tricep injury, and of course, a groin injury. If those injuries did not take place, he was on pace to continue in his success. So hopefully this year with the new offensive coordinator, that isn't going to be a hiccup in the road, and he's only going to continue his level of success considering all the weapons that surround him. DK Metcalf, Kenneth Walker, JSN, Lockett, Fant. There's a lot of weapons. And yes, this offensive line is not the greatest, but Geno Smith is mobile enough still at this age to be a fantasy relevant quarterback. Number 24, we have Sam Darnold. Here's the fact of the matter. A lot of people look at Sam Darnold and they don't think he's great. And for fantasy purposes, he hasn't been terrible. Over the course of his last 16 starts from 2021 to 2023, he's averaged 14.89 fantasy points per game. And you may be thinking, Andrew, that's not a great number. Just remember, in the last 16 starts of Tua Tagovailoa season in 2023, he averaged 15.9 fantasy points per game. Only 1 point per game on average more. Again, there isn't that much of a difference, especially considering Sam Darnold hasn't played in an offense at this level. You're adding him into an offense with Justin Jefferson, Addison, Hawkinson, Aaron Jones, a great offensive line, and a great offensive play caller with Kevin O'Connell. On top of the fact that, again, in the last 16 games that Sam Darnold has started within the National Football League, he scored 25 total touchdowns. It's not like he is going ahead and not scoring. He's going to continue to score, and I think, honestly, he's one of these quarterbacks that is being slept on, and that's why he sits at my number 24, that in a 2QB league can be a starter for many of us. Number 25, we have Daniel Jones. That is correct. I have Daniel Jones at 25, primarily because of the potential of his rushing upside, and that's really what the only intrigue is that revolves around Daniel Jones. Yes, he's going to be in a pass-heavy offense. He does get more weapons with specifically Malik Neighbors. They brought in Theo Johnson, the new tight end, that obviously is going to take over due to the absence of Darren Waller retiring. But without Saquon and this being a pass-heavy offense, they cannot take Daniel Jones off the field. They're going to let him run his arm or body into the ground every single week. And honestly, he deserves the opportunity to do so. They're paying him a lot of money to play quarterback for the New York Giants. So they're not going to take him off the field. He's going to be running a lot. And yes, even though he's coming off of an ACL injury, it is going to be reduced rushing upside. He's going to be passing more than he ever has in his entire career. And hopefully, for his sake, he's able to find success. Number 26, we have Derek Carr. Derek Carr has been consistently mediocre. Okay, what he has ranked over the course of his entire career is very similar. And honestly, we should end up seeing him rank within this range, assuming other quarterbacks get injured over the course of the season, which again, based on recent history, it's going to happen. Since 2014, Derek Carr is ranked as the number 20, 14, 10, 19, 18, 16, 13, 14, 17, and most recently, the number 16 overall quarterback throughout those given seasons. He is never ranked outside of the top 20. So I currently have him at 26, where you may be thinking, why is this the case, Andrew? Well, his fantasy point per game average does not speak to being a top 16 to 18 overall quarterback this upcoming season. But the fact of the matter is that he has stayed healthy in almost every year. And because he has been able to maintain his health, a lot of the other quarterbacks that have random season-ending injuries allow Derek Carr to get into the top conversation. So if you want to get yourself a safe quarterback that sure isn't going to be able to, win you given weeks, and may end up, specifically losing you weeks in some scenarios, but still is going to be solid, Derek Carr is potentially at the end of that road. Someone that I prefer to have as my QB3, but in a desperate scenario in which you're drafting a top-tier quarterback like a Josh Allen early in the first round and then not reinvesting in quarterback for a very long time, Derek Carr would be the guy you go after if you're looking for that late quarterback investment. Number 27, we have Will Levis. Last season, in his 8 healthy starts, averaged 12.93 fantasy points per game. But now he has a new offensive coordinator, a new regime, and honestly, far more offensive weapons at his disposal. You bring in Brian Callahan, who is the new head coach and now the primary play caller, the former OC of the Cincinnati Bengals. You bring in Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd, Tony Pollard, and hopefully we'll have a healthy DeAndre Hopkins on hand. They've gone ahead and invested in offensive line in the first round in each of the last 2 NFL drafts. Will Levis will be given the reign of opportunity to be the starting quarterback of the Tennessee Titans. It's just a matter of, can he deliver with the opportunity that he is given? Hopefully he's able to. He has sneaky rushing ability, which could end up elevating him within these overall rankings if he's able to, of course, stay healthy within those rushing attempts. But we're going to have to wait and see whether or not the second-year quarterback could take advantage of the opportunity. Speaking of second-year quarterbacks, let's talk about Bryce Young. Obviously, the number 1 overall pick last year. And now we have Dave Canales joining this organization, who most recently resurrected the careers of Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield, now tasked with resurrecting Bryce Young, which honestly should be easy. We have seen, again, Bryce Young be a very talented quarterback, but based on what he had surrounding him last year, whether it was coaching staff, offensive line, offensive weapons, they weren't up to par. And this is very reminiscent of what we saw just a couple years back with Trevor Lawrence in his rookie year. And the same turnaround is taking place. Trevor Lawrence, what allowed him to improve in year 2 and year 3 was an improvement of offensive coordinator and play calling, an improvement at offensive line, an improvement at offensive weapons. So going into this year with Bryce Young, getting Dave Canales, getting offensive improvements in terms of offensive line, Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis. You bring in Deontay Johnson. You bring in Jonathan Brooks. You bring in a new rookie tight end. You also get Xavier Legette in the first round, as a wide receiver. You still have Adam Thielen there. The focus has been trying to improve this offense. And I think Bryce Young could very easily step up and get into the top 20 conversation if Dave Canales can really, once again, for another consecutive year, resurrect a quarterback's career, which, again, for a talent of his level, wouldn't be a surprise. Number 29, we have Gardner Minshew. The reason why I have Gardner Minshew here is because there is always a possibility that he could be replaced. In comparison to these other quarterbacks, Bryce Young, Will Levis, Derek Carr, Daniel Jones, Sam Darnold, he has a higher likelihood of getting replaced because Aiden O'Connell is in the wings. And it was a very tough decision for Antonio Pierce to make, calling Gardner Minshew the starting quarterback of this team. But I think it was the right decision. In fact, last season, even though 10 of his 13 starts produced less than 15 fantasy points, he was still able to average 13.75 fantasy points per game. And now you get an improved offense surrounding you. In my opinion, when you get Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, Brock Bowers, in comparison to what they had in Indianapolis, which was a run-first approach with Michael Pittman Jr., Josh Downs, and their tight ends, Mo Alley Cox, I guess. So in my opinion, improvement in terms of the weapons around him. He still could get replaced over the course of the season, midway through, if Aiden O'Connell ends up coming in for a game because Gardner Minshew is throwing too many picks. It's always within the realm of possibility, but that is exactly why Gardner Minshew sits here at number 29. Number 30 is Russell Wilson. Despite the fact that Russell Wilson was number 13 overall amongst all quarterbacks last year in terms of total fantasy points scored, and he was averaging 17.12 fantasy points per game, it is very similar to Gardner Minshew because I am scared that there is a possibility that he could get replaced in any given week. If this offense isn't able to score, Justin Fields is going to be given an opportunity. And if Justin Fields takes over this job because Russell Wilson allows him to, there's a chance that the job may never go back. There's nothing holding the organization to having to give Russell Wilson more opportunities. Quite frankly, they're not paying him anything this year because the majority of his salary is being paid by the Denver Broncos, having released him. So the expectation is that there is a chance that Russell Wilson can maintain as the starting quarterback of this team. If he plays just as well as he did last year, it would be a surprise to me, considering the offensive weapons that sit within this offense, the offensive coordinator, and the fact that they're going to want to run the ball as much as they want to. But the fact that he could get replaced at any given moment is why I have him ranked so low. Bo Nix is a number 31. He's a rookie quarterback. The expectation is that Sean Payton should be able to put him into scenarios in which he's able to succeed, but he's still a rookie quarterback. He's going to find himself struggling at times, and hopefully he can have himself a solid rookie season, especially in comparison to guys like Jayden Daniels and Caleb Williams. But again, a rookie quarterback in an offense that doesn't have much talent in it is going to be difficult. But from what we have seen in terms of his preseason production, again, taking on vanilla defenses, totally different. We still have hope that he could still be a solid quarterback and our number 3 in a superflex format. The final 2 quarterbacks I wanted to mention, depending on who is announced as the starting quarterback of the New England Patriots between Drake Maye and Jacoby Brissett, are the final 2. I think it's going to be a season in which we begin with Jacoby Brissett, and once in fact he's able to throw himself, under the bus, eventually they'll allow Drake Maye to take over this, starting position probably midway through. So we'll see who ends up being the starting quarterback to begin with. I think it's far smarter for them to start with Jacoby Brissett, have Drake Maye learn over the first couple weeks, at least through watching Jacoby Brissett in these overall tough scenarios, and then after he learns, throw him into the fire and see what he's made of. All right, guys, that's going to cover it for my updated top 32 quarterback rankings for the 2024 fantasy football season. If you enjoyed today's content, subscribe, click the like button down below. Let me know down in the comment section what quarterbacks are you drafting this upcoming season. Of course, I want to thank you guys for continuing to support the channel. If you guys want my all-encompassing rankings, you can check out Underdog Fantasy first and foremost using code Andrew. Making one first-time deposit minimum of $10 gets you the draft guide, gets you the rankings, and then continues to get you the rankings every single Sunday morning for the remainder of the season. Additionally, you can draft alongside of me, draft yourself, and go ahead and build experience for your upcoming leagues, or you can go ahead and check out Patreon. I have all that content and much more available for those of you interested. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.